Main man here. Y'all know how I get down. We talking boxing, man. Yo, did y'all check out that press conference between Chris Eubanks Jr. and George Groves, man? They have an upcoming fight. It's going to be the semifinals of the 168-pound tournament that's going down with the World Boxing Super Series, and this can honestly have been the finals, truth be told, but this is the semifinals. And these two, man, there's some genuine bad blood between these two. Chris Eubanks Jr. with the hunger in his eyes, George Groves at this point in his career being the crafty veteran, a guy with all the world experience, now a world champion. Man, this fight is going to be explosive, man. I'm really looking forward to this one, man. Well, I'm not going to give much strategy in this vid right here. I'm just going to kind of cover the press conference, go over some of the things that were said, and kind of give my takeaways of it. Matter of fact, you know what? I'll start off with my takeaways first. First off, on the Chris Eubanks Jr. side, the number one thing that stood off to me, man, about Chris Eubanks Jr. was his when his father came out and made the comment that basically Chris Eubanks Jr. trains himself. According to Chris Eubank Sr., he stated that Chris Eubanks Jr. operates in some sort of internal GPS system. He says, we let him train alone. I don't really train him. Ronnie, who is the trainer of Chris Eubanks Jr., he doesn't really train him. They just let him do his own thing. And I'm thinking to myself, even George Grosz kind of picked up on it like, yo, really? And I believe you. And that's not a good thing to say. I mean, this may be some new way of Chris Eubanks Sr. Seeing that this is the best thing for his son in particular. And maybe it works for Chris Eubanks Jr. But, yo, he's a young fighter and he's still learning. He don't know everything. He can always be still learning. If you want to take the approach that I got this, I know what I'm doing, coach, I got this, I know more than you know, or that ain't nothing that you can teach me. When you have that sort of attitude, man, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to reach your peak very fast. Very, very fast. That is the number one thing I think that stood out to me, to be honest with you, for the whole press conference. That just didn't sit well with me. For one, that was a smack in the face to his trainer. That's one. And I understand what Chris Eubanks Sr. is doing. He's showing that, look, I'm guiding my son the right way, right? I teach him about all the obstacles that he's going to run into in the sport of boxing. I make sure that his path is clear and I'm doing what's best for him. I get that. You know what I mean? I do get that philosophy. But to say that I'm going to let him basically learn on his own, or he trains himself, he wraps his own gloves, like these type of things are just, I guess you can say, unorthodox for a fighter, And so that to me kind of stood out like a sore thumb. I was just like, yo, what? And George Groves kind of knew about that and he kind of nudged at that, you know what I mean? But yo, when they actually stamped it and came out and just was like, yeah, he trains himself. And then Chris Eubanks Jr. has the nerve to go back to George Groves and say, hey, well, you rely too much on your team. A fighter is supposed to rely on their team. What is the number one thing that Floyd Mayweather always says? I want to give thanks to a very strong team, Al Heyman, blah, blah, blah. But he always gives props to his team because it takes a team effort to get a fighter ready for a big level fight. It does. You know what I mean? I don't see that as a detriment towards George Groves by far. Why is it wrong? Why does Chris Eubanks Jr. find it wrong that George Groves assigned tasks to his team and he requires his paid team to execute these tasks? Because you want that fighter focusing squarely on fighting. It's like being a musician or a rapper. I'll take the rapper example since I rap. The thing is like you as a rapper by yourself, and making it in this game is impossible. You need a team. You need somebody doing your social media, somebody doing your promotions, somebody getting different deals in the office for you. Like, you need a team. You need a street team to blanket the streets with your music. Like, you're not going to make it without a team. And it's the same way for a boxer. If a boxer believes that he is just going to be this great boxer and do it all by himself, he's not going to sign nothing to a team, then you fooling yourself, man. And that's why I get the notion, it seems to me, that Junior and his father sometimes come off as a little too smug for me. I know they say they exuberate class. I get it. Chris Eubanks Jr. hairline is always lined up perfectly. He's always well shaven. The father is always in these clean suits, well shaven, says his S's extra freaking hard. Side note, you know what I mean? Like, yo, I understand they want to look classy and all that stuff. They want to look all distinguished and be these type of people. But yo, tell Chris Eubank Sr. to stop emphasizing so much on the s. Every time I hear him talk, all I hear is s, s, s. Yeah, he's a different pedigree. S, s. Like, that shit look fruity, man. Like, I don't want to call him that, but I know he's a good fighter, former good fighter or whatever. But yo, the dude Chris Eubank Sr. just says the S's a little too hard for my liking. But that's just a side note. But anyway, back to what I was saying, man. They tend to come off as smug sometimes. You know, like, our way is the best way. You don't know what you're talking about. Diminishing George Groves. You know, I understand, you know, they're supposed to be hungry. They supposed to show the distinction between the two fighters. But, yo, don't be acting like George Groves ain't paid his dues, though. You know what I mean? George Groves paid his dues. I thoroughly, I got my criticisms of George Groves that I'll get to. But, yo, George Groves paid his dues, man. It took the man, 3 different championship fights to finally get a belt, man. Like, yo, get a man his props, man. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, George Groves paid his dues, whether you like him or not. The one thing you can never say that George Groves doesn't deserve a little bit of respect, and he paid his dues. He was a whinger himself. That's what y'all term. He was a crybaby himself. You know what I'm saying? At one point in time, but that's another video, man. But you know, that's basically my standouts that came out from the Eubank side. Now, from the George Groves side, it's always been a psychotic thing with me and George Groves. Like, every time I see George Groves, he just reminds me of this guy that's always on the brink of breaking down or some shit, you know what I mean? But the one thing that I noticed about George Groves, as the one first thing that stood out, and I couldn't believe my ears when I heard this, is when I believe it was Chris Eubanks Jr. who stated that when George Groves fought Carl Froch took something out of George Groves. And then George Groves turned around and agreed. He's like, yeah, I agree. At the time, yeah, he took something away from me. It takes a big man to be, to admit something like that, especially by you being a boxer. It takes a big man to really admit that. And we all knew it. But damn, he actually said it. Like, yeah, Carl Froch did take something away from me in that particular fight. And I was like, what the hell is George Groves saying? He's supposed to at least put the tough face on or whatever. I mean, I appreciate him keeping it 100, but yo, like, come on, man. Like, you don't say nothing like that in a press conference building up to a dude who thinks he's more inferior than you. Yeah, he took something away from you. So now that man is walking around thinking that you missing something. I get it that George Groves did say, yeah, he took something away from me at the time. But, yo, you don't know if George Groves really got over that shit. You know what I'm saying? And I just was like, yo, George Groves, you like, put your best foot forward, man. Put your bravado out there. Don't be telling that man that, But anyway, George Groves seems though a bit too interested in what Chris Eubanks Jr. had to say, meaning that it seemed like George Groves was hanging on every single word. You know what I mean? And that always has been George Groves. He lets words affect him. And this is the reason why I think that Chris Eubanks Sr. went along the line of saying how powerful words are, some little quote like that he gave. But it seems like in George Groves' case, they really pierce him, man. And I've always said that about George Groves. He hangs on every word. He wants to say things and then turn around and look you in the face to see how his words are affecting you, because he is overly concerned about you. And I don't know where he gets that from. I always said maybe the Carl Froch fights, because in those fights, in those buildups, George Groves tried his best to psych out Carl Froch. He did it and he tried to do it from every angle. He tried to show Carl Froch that, hey, man, I've been studying you, dude. I know everything about you. Trying his best to get into the head of Carl Froch. And yet it didn't work. And it seems like now that George Groves is, when he shoots his shots, he got to look after the shot to see where the shot landed and if it landed in a vital place. You know what I'm saying? And that's George Groves, man. And that can be seen as a bit of a weakness, because you are always concerned what your opponent does and not what you do well. And even Chris Eubanks Jr. pointed that out in the press conference as well, man. George Groves also seemed a bit unsure. He was very humble. I understand, he shouldn't be going too far, but he just seemed a bit unsure to me in this fight, and George Groves have been asking for this fight. This is not a fight that he ran away from by any means. He even got with the planners of the World Boxing Super Series and tried to have this thing plan out in the way that it is planning out. So George Groves didn't run away from the fight. But it seemed like, sometimes George Groves just seemed a bitch detached sometimes, man. And I know y'all know what I'm talking about, man. Come on, yo. And And also, when they talked about them two sparring in the past, and whenever it was brought up, it seems to me that George Grosz kind of got rattled or a bit buckled when they were talking about it. When Chris Eubanks Jr. Put the point out there that, hey man, can I just put the whole tape out there? George Grosz like, yeah, but no long as you don't put out like 10-second clips like that Conor McGregor crap. Don't put out like 10-second clips. Put out the whole sparring match. Chris Eubanks Jr. is like, sure, absolutely, 100%. But George Grosz didn't seem very sure about that sparring. You know what I'm saying? It'd be interesting if a sparring tape gets leaked before the fight, and to see what really went down, man. But this is going to be a huge freaking fight, yo. This fight is going to have George Grosz' WBA super title on the line. Also, the IBO title that Chris Eubanks Jr. wears. He's going to be holding that down, man. Yo, man, this thing is already sold out within minutes. It's going down in Manchester, man. This is going to be a huge fight that I am really looking forward to, man. Real talk. So those are just some of my minor takeaways away from that press conference. To go over some of the things that were said very, very quickly. Chris Eubanks Jr. believes that George Grosz has peaked, and he believes that he is still getting better, meaning that George Grosz has gotten as good as George Grosz was going to get. Though George Grosz is still young. I think he's still in his 20s, if not maybe 30 on the dot. You know what I'm saying? But he's still fairly young. But according to Chris Eubanks Jr., he believes George Grosz has totally peaked. How do you feel about that? That could be a very strong possibility, ladies and gentlemen. He has finally won him a world championship. It took him three times or so to do it. So maybe he has. I don't know. Do you guys think Chris Eubanks Jr. is right with that? According to Chris Eubanks Jr., he's the much faster fighter. He can throw in combinations. As to George Grosz, who is a counterpuncher, one punch at a time, and is looking to counter you into a trap. You know what I mean? That is very true, and that will play out into my analysis when I do a prediction video. According to Chris Eubanks Jr., he's the faster fighter. I just kind of went over that, which I thoroughly agree with. It says that he said that George Grosz needs to plant his feet and punch, similar to what Gennady Golovkin does. I haven't seen that much from George Grosz. I didn't think that was a necessity for him to swing, but I will have to, I guess, evaluate George Grosz a bit further. But this is what Chris Eubanks Jr. says that Chris Eubanks Jr. feels as though he is the higher pedigree than George Grosz. George Grosz did lose to Froch, and he did lose to Badu Jack. But I don't know, man. He's lost to a lot of worthy names, but he's beaten some good ones like James DeGale, Arthur Abrams. Like, yo, I don't know. It's a hard call, man. The Yildirim fight was not supposed to be a slouch fight for Eubanks Jr., and he disposed of that guy pretty good, man. I don't know. That's a question I'll just leave for the fans. I'd like to see y'all answer that, man. Grosz can hit very good. He has good power, but he lacks in every other department. That's what Chris Eubanks Jr. says. I think I disagree with that. I think Grosz does have good hand speed, and I also think Grosz has respectable defense as well. He gets tagged up, but if you compare him to most 168 pounders, and his defense is not the worst. But those are some of the things that I took away from Chris Eubanks Jr. says. And, I kind of went over everything else. Says George Grosz relies on his team. George Grosz' coach is a kid in the game, throwing shots at Shane McGuigan, whatever the hell you name. But those are some of the things that Eubanks Jr. says. As for George Grosz, man, he says that, he has the most experience. He's fought at the highest level, which he has. He does have more experience than Chris Eubanks Jr., but that's not to say that Chris Eubanks Jr. has no experience. He has a higher pedigree. That was debated in the press conference. The Eubanks Jr. side feel as though they have the higher pedigree. And, of course, George Grosz feel like he has the highest pedigree. That's a subjective topic. Eubanks has only fought slow fighters. Very interesting. Now, if you go back and you look at Chris Eubanks Jr.'s resume, you will see your fair share of flat-footed, very slow fighters. But, however, Chris Eubanks Jr. is not an ultimate champion. He's not a super champion yet. He's coming up through the ranks. What the hell else you expect for him to fight, right? And last but not least, Grosz concerns that Eubanks is faster. You know, Grosz did show concerns throughout that press conference about the hand speed of Chris Eubanks Jr. And maybe he does have some reservations for that. Will the speed of Chris Eubanks Jr. outbid the power of George Grosz? That remains to be seen, ladies and gentlemen. And those are just some of my takeaways from the press conference, man. It was very entertaining. I'll probably leave a link to the actual press conference in my description box here, man. But yo, that joint was turned, man. I enjoyed it. You know, UK does it the best, man. They always doing big things, man. So I'm very interested to see how this event gonna play out. You know, Eddie Hearn is not involved in this, so he's been the guy giving all the big pretty fireworks and all the big pretty events. But let's see if how this event gonna play out, man, because I am dying to know. And before I end this video, let me just say, Chris Eubank Sr., work on them S's, man. You know what I mean? You can't be running around talking about some, yo, man, can I can I go around and just, you know, I don't know if I should go this way or that way or this way or that way or this. Because see, when you think about this, you got to stop that bullshit, bruh. Because that shit make you look softer than a baby's thigh. And that's just my opinion. So to the next video, don't forget to subscribe. Peace out.